and this are made the same way that those are over there, with the two pieces put together and then finished. These little round pots I'll work on over a few days, where I'll start the pot and then just keep bowing it out and getting this high shoulder on it. The instinct, it's sort of counterintuitive, because to make this, the first thing you do is make the tallest cylinder that you can. Whereas if you take it and just make it round like that, it'll be real heavy. You're never going to get that clay off the bottom, so you want to start with that. At the last gallery hop, I think this was the one, maybe it was this one. One of these were sitting here, and someone had just seen me throw a pot, and I pointed it. It never occurred to me. I said, "See that little hole? How did I get my hand in there?" People, "Yeah, how'd you do that?" And it's, if you do this thousands of times, you don't really give it a second thought. I mean, the skill. I mean, this to me seems like a real crazy idea of trimming away the circle and say, "Oh, it's a square." And then you can make a joke about that too. But here, let me bring where that it's kind of got a thud to it. And what I like to do is to brush on a lot of this stuff, all these white lines, which I'll show in a little bit. These white lines is just a squirt bottle with the white clay, and then I brush this on, because if you were to try to brush this on later, it's just not going to be even. Whereas if the wheel's turning, you just have to hold the brush still. So it's a simple way. Good ideas are always simple ideas. Now that's just the bare clay. And then this entire inside here, you can see is a different color. That it should make this cobalt blue that you see on a lot of antiques, Crocs and so forth. And then this is that's the plain glaze. And of course this was brushed on underneath. And you can see it's a little bit square, just because I'm rebellious. Item to sell wholesale, like the gift shops and so forth. And it's got a little hole in it. You put an egg in and tip it, so it separates the egg. I don't think anybody does that anymore. They put paper clips in them. But it's a good novelty. It's handmade, so on and so forth. But it also is, again, this simple shape. Like if you see a flower pot, how they're shaped like this. Mm-hmm. There's a reason for that they can just be rammed and they'll pop out of the mold. A piece with an overhang like that, mm-hmm. If you wanted to mold that, it would be more complicated. So you want to do things by hand that a machine can't do. The same guy that I was watching, that hadn't occurred to him that the finished pot has a hole that you can't get your hand in. He was watching, was very interested, and I was throwing, and pulling this. He says, I see you're putting grooves in it. I said, no, I'm just squeezing that clay as hard as I can and trying to pull it up and use the mechanical advantage of the wheel, and it leaves some grooves. I said, but I'll smooth a lot of that out later, but I always leave a little bit, so that machines can't do that. I mean, you see some commercial pots that kind of have that faked, but then you realize they go around and they're not really a helix. So it's always good to have, the hand in it. Yeah. If you look at American Gothic, at Grant Wood's American Gothic, and look right under the eye of the man, his dentist, Byron McKeeby, the guy holding the pitchfork, you can see his fingerprint. Because Grant Wood would push the clay around a lot with his fingers. And it's sort of funny, because there it is, it's like forensic evidence. These, see, now when I make this, I have to go back, I leave extra clay and then go back and then trim off everything but this ring so that it sits right. But you get this nice curve. And that's something to look for, at art fairs or something, to see how the bowls have a continuous curve. Because again, the instinct is to open the clay and then do this, so you end up with kind of a pie pan thing. Well, I eliminated the step of putting the ring on by just having the shallow, flat, I call them flat bottom bowls. But this is, I also call them microwave casserole dishes. Because if I don't have a casserole here, if this were a casserole and had a lid, I'd have to make the bowl, I'd have to trim the bottom, I'd have to make a lid, and I'd have to trim it, I'd have to make a knob and put that on. That's too much work. You know, this, another thing that I look for in a bowl is a little bit of a spontaneity, a little bit of a little dance of the curve.
Say that again. You're old-fashioned.
Old-fashioned.
Meaning?
I didn't do a lot of clay work for a while, and I feel like Rip Van Winkle now, because everyone gets their clay delivered to them in plastic bags that are in a cardboard box, you know, and it can't be very big. Clay is heavy, so if you're going to order 1,000 pounds of clay, you're thinking, I don't want all those boxes. Why am I buying the boxes? But first of all, you can make your own clay better than any machine. And the way I do it is I blend the different clays, because there's 4 different types of clay in here, and then sift it into like a bathtub. That's called slaking. There's a lot of good pottery words. Slake is a good one. But you sift it, and that way the clay sinks, sits on the water and sinks. Every particle of clay is saturated. Now, if you were to take a machine, no matter how complicated it was, if you put the water and clay in there and turn that machine on, it would take an eternity for that to be saturated. So now you have saturated clay, but you got a lot more water than you need. So you put it on plaster, and plaster will soak the excess water out. You have really good clay. The reason you want all the particles to be wet is because clay particles are flat. It's why clay is sticky and slippery at the same time. 2 pieces of glass, like 2 mirrors, will slide like this. If you stick them together and try them, they're sticky. Same thing with clay. We want to make sure there's water. That plasticity is important. I mean, you can work with a coarse clay, but if you saturate the clay and dewater it, like deplaning. I always wonder what the opposite of deplaning. You pull up, they say, where did it deplane? They say, well, when did we plane? Thought we boarded. So there's a lot of good words. So anyway, this, when it comes off of the plaster, this is still too soft. It's kind of lumpy, but if you do this, that's 1, 2, 3, 4. This is a math problem, by the way. If you do this 20 times, you have 1,000,000 layers. Actually, more than 1,000,000. More than 1,000,000 layers of clay. So you can really, you could take a white clay and a red clay and do that 20 times, and that would be blended. Another thing you can do is take 2 different colors of clay and only do it 4 or 5 times, and you've got this striped clay. Carl Christensen told me this. He was standing there wedging clay, and he's got his corncob pipe, and he has this real effortless way of doing it. And he says, you do this 20 times, you got 1,000,000 layers. So I figured that out with a pencil and paper. That was before calculators. So not that I would doubt it, but I said, sorry, I'm going to just check. So it's 2 to the 19th or whatever. The other thing, this really makes the clay smooth. It gets the air bubbles out. And the other thing is, if you've got a piece of junk or something in there, if you cut it 20 times, you're got a good chance of finding that thing before, you know, if you work on a pot for 20 minutes and all of a sudden there's, I don't know, cigarette butt or something, and you think, well, starting over. Now and then I just do this a little again. This is the way I did it for a long time. You want to kind of have a gumdrop shape. But if you do that a lot, the clay twists. Those flat particles will start to align in a spiral. And again, go to art fairs and you can look on the inside bottom or underneath on a pot, you'll see an S. And that's the twist of the clay. So what I used to do, you know, when I would wedge it like this, is then, see, the twist is now this way. I would just change the shape. So now that twist is that way, and there's a lot of stress in there. Another thing, more for art fair tips, look at the handles on a pot, and invariably they're crooked. Because when the pot fires, a wheel-thrown pot, it'll unwind a little. There's a little excitement. Well, let's see. Let's cover this for now. This table is all salvaged material that came out of this building. I don't think you can see it on the end, but it's all 2x4s. So this is like a butcher block. And then we got scavenged some masonite. This really is a good surface because it's just barely porous. So the clay doesn't want to stick, but it's not so porous that, you know, it's going to break down and get the clay. Anyway, let's go over here. Are we on now?
Yeah,
Okay.
we're on.
All right. I'm going to put the bucket over here so you can see what I'm doing. In fact, I'm going to turn this a little. I'll give you a tour of my equipment. I bought this in 1971, and it was it was a very innovative design. In fact, the guy that designed these sold his company and then went and designed racing engines. I don't know, isn't it Robert Brent is his name, so people call these Brent wheels. But he came up with this electronic gizmo where you could have, it's a DC motor, so you can have torque at low RPMs, and then also, this is so much better than a kick wheel. I learned on one of those, and I had surgery on my foot after a few years from just kicking it all the time. But anyway, it's just a terrific design. This is only maybe 5 years old, so you can see they haven't really modified it much. And then this bucket, someone used this bucket. I said, don't use that bucket. They got all huffy. I said, look, I started using that bucket to make pottery 15 years before you were born. It's a little sentimental. Don't mess with it. And then, continuing the tour, here's a cushion my sister made for me. This is from the Frankfurt Arsenal in Philly to the Rock Island Arsenal to Lloyd Gilbert at the Metal Finishes Lab. Okay? When I went to graduate school, that was in the garage. My dad had brought something home from it. And I put a bunch of heavy things in there, you know, just to carry things, just in my car. That's all I had in the world. I took off in my car. And when I got to the shop, I said, well, that's about the right height ergonomically. I've been using it ever since. Now, when I would go to an art fair back then, I'm not going to be using this crate. I'm not going to be throwing pots. So I would use it to carry nuts and bolts and heavy things and take it with me. So I stopped. I was going to Chicago, and I pulled into a rest area just across the river from Louisville and pulled in there and pulled in next to this Winnebago, and it had a Rock Island Arsenal sticker, which they used to have bumper sticker, and that was how they checked you. I mean, as long as you had that, you could drive onto the Arsenal. So I get out, and there's someone walking towards the Winnebago. I said, I see you got an Arsenal sticker. My dad worked at the Arsenal. And she said, oh, really? Yeah. Who's your dad? And I said, well, there's thousands of people. It's Joral Knanishu. And she goes, hey, Lloyd, it's Jake's boy. So he comes over. He said, boy, isn't that a coincidence? Can you imagine that? I said, that's not a coincidence. I went to the back of the truck, opened it up, and there's his name on the crate. That was that guy. Go figure. He didn't know what to think then. But he worked in the metal plating and paint development and all that. So he was good buddies with my dad. All right, now let's talk about pottery.
Yeah, let's see.
The first thing you want to do is get, I think I can put this over here. Is get the clay in the center. And you can see this is already starting to twist the clay. So you want to use a lot of water when you do this. And after you've been making pots for a year or two, I guarantee you have at least 10 bad habits that you've developed for centering. I mean, there's a right way, and then there's the way that you figure out works okay. So you don't have to follow. But it's important, especially when you're learning, it's a good way to feel the pressure of how to move and how much pressure to put on the clay. Again, if you see a beginner, they're just kind of doing this, and the pressure, your shoulders, those, I used to, that's another thing I like about this. Hold on to the wheel and really, do some leverage. Because if you're doing this all day, this will wear you out if you're not being conscientious about using your muscles, using the physical effort efficiently. Pottery is also a good reason to do yoga, because if you don't, your back's going to be bad. I have a congenital back problem, and when I started doing yoga, it made a big difference. Now the second step is to open it up. This is going to be a bowl. So like I was saying earlier, you don't want to just open it up. You want to start. At this point, you're kind of like you're thinking upside down, that you finish the bottom of the pot first. And all this is, you got to put this where you're going to need it later, which is it really is like lifting. The clay happens to be spinning, but you're just grabbing hold of the clay and pulling up. It's hard to describe, any hand skill or any eye-hand coordination thing. Verbalizing, who was it? That was writing about music is like dancing about architecture. I don't know, that's not it. Who said it? I can't remember. But it's this doesn't lend itself to a description.
And you're using a sponge.
Yes, I can hold it. I'm using my fingertips, and if I hold the sponge right here, I can kind of feed it a little water. There's a little town in Florida called Tarpon Springs. It's right up in the corner where it bends over into the panhandle on the Gulf side. And it's a little town. I don't know if they have McDonald's, but they have at least 50 stores that sell sponges. It's like a company town that they have, and you can go and get any kind of sponge, which is this. That's a synthetic sponge,
Okay.
but an abrasion in clay.
And why an elephant ear sponge?
That's usually what people use for this, but I find I work right on the edge of that. But there's the point, like now, for example, that I don't want to be adding a lot of water. The sponge will help spread out the pressure. Like here, I want to kind of smooth that top. Now, what I was saying earlier, that you want to have this clay where you're going to need it later, that the wider this gets, the thinner the walls will get. So you don't want the walls to be tapered off to a little thin edge. Again, something else you'll see at art fairs is some people have a nice solid rim on the bowl. That will keep it from warping, first of all, when you fire it, but it also gives the piece some strength while you're making it, and it's also less likely to get banged around when you're using it. Another funny thing, you sit there and do this all the time, and these ideas just kind of float around, and you reach a conclusion you didn't know you were wondering about. When I'm throwing, I'm just using my fingertips. Like even the painter's holding the brush with your hand, but the only contact I have with the medium is my fingertips. In fact, I want to have as little contact area as possible with the most pressure. Another thing I think is important is to pull the clay up, get it to size, and then shape it. It's different steps. Whereas like when the sculpture, you're building that organically. The first thing you do, clay sculpture, if you're modeling clay, that it's going to take shape from as soon as you start working on it. But to get a nice bowl, for example, if I'm going to be able to save this one. Well, that little anomaly there is an opportunity to show another artistic trick, which is if you if you make a mistake, like what I just did, first of all, you have to admit that it's the water's under the bridge and start over sometimes. But I think this still has a chance. But
Like, what was the mistake?
oh, my hand went this way when it shouldn't. I don't know. I think it's from riding my bike where I lean on the handlebars, and then my wrists. It's just like the pressure on my wrists is bothersome. Now this is another thing. Other potters have said, "Gee, you're using these are ribs, called ribs, by the way. You're throwing with 2 ribs," and I don't know. I find it good. You can see I've got a little. At this point, again, I'm only making an edge contact. I'm actually having less less contact with the surface and can smooth out some of those rings and get the walls fairly smooth, which is important because when I'm making, which I'll show you here in a sec, this is another rib that it's just a real thin piece of metal.
And
These probably cost $3 or something, or $10, but you can bend it to any shape. This is a hard rubber rib. It's got a little bit of give. So you want to have a good selection. All right, now see right there, that's where my finger caught it. Now, I could put a little clay in there, but what I'm going to do instead, oops, I'm not down here. Now, I'm not going to do any more forming on it, but you can see here, that's all going to get carved away except for that ring that I showed you on that bowl, okay? So when it's right side up, I make a little mark where I've got my hand on the inside where I can feel the uniform, where the wall starts to go like this. So I'll make a little notch. And then, just to save me a little time and to help me get it back on center, I remove that. And then, where that, I don't know if that'll show, where that little thing is, Yep. Went around. Now I'll go back and adjust that later, but that's a little like for pancake batter.
I
You
see.
pour it right out of the bowl. Again, this is not, you can't make a mold that will release this because it has this irregularity to it.
that's it.
Okay, you want to do something that a machine can't do. That's the way I look at it. Let's see, where's my wire?
What about those little pieces that are on the bottom there?
Which is that? This?
Yeah, if you turn around, I can see a little piece still on the side.
Oh, that'll get carved away.
Oh, okay.
Then that's a guitar string. Now that will sit there, but when this is dry enough that I can lift it without misshapen it, that'll release it. That's all. I mean, you'd think it would just stick back to it.
Okay.
And this, which is the American Folk Art Museum, it's just off the mall. It's about a block east of the White House on M Street, I think. It's the old patent office building. It's a neat old building, red stone, red sandstone, but they have very, very nice exhibits, and that, how the Smithsonian is really, 16 different museums, and that's American art, folk art, that kind of stuff is all there. And what they did with the show, they had it there for a year, and then they broke it up into 3 sections. I think it was 120 something pieces in it. And then that traveled around the country to different places, and all had to be in small galleries and small museums and so forth. And because it was supposed to be something you did multiple editions of, which I did, to the chagrin of my thesis committee. They wanted me to be doing original art. You try and do the same thing over and over and over and over. That's hard to do. If you do something once, you can say, that's what I was trying to do. So the thing was, these different towns and different locations where the show went, knew they could contact you and order one. So I got orders from all over the place for these mixing bowls. And that's, I don't get them anymore, but I'm sure that's buried under, it's in a crate that'll never be opened again. But it was a, very prestigious exhibit to be in. And then what was funny, on 2 separate occasions afterwards, the guy who was the director gave me awards for other stuff. Obviously, he liked my stuff. Now, that brings us back to the pieces I showed you with the Rock Island Fine Art Guild. I haven't entered a show in 20 years, because I said, I don't care what a juror thinks. I'd rather make something that someone likes enough to buy it and take it home and use it. So I kind of did that on a lark, because that was one of the lessons that you have to incorporate the whims of the jury or the juror, and if they don't like your medium, it doesn't matter how good it is, that sort of thing. And then the last time I entered a show was a piece. It was the 8 southeastern states, and they wanted a price or an insurance value or something to put not for sale, but you have to put insurance value. So, no, I'll sell $450. No one's going to buy that. And then came a check for $450. I said, I give up. This just doesn't make any sense. I mean, obviously, it was a nice piece, but I was thinking, I'll put a price. People, I've worked in galleries, and people will come in and say, help me price it. And I said, well, here's what you want to do. You don't want anyone to buy it, and you don't want no one to buy it, and you don't want to work for less than you're going to get out of it. And like it or not, none of us are the great artists we like to think we are. So you just keep working into the middle, and then there's your price. So I said, well, if this thing is $400 and something, that just seems ridiculous, but yeah, it was a good piece, actually. All right, now what I'm going to do here, let's zoom over here. Pan, not zoom, pan. I got to use the right terms. This, hopefully I end up with something like this. And on this piece, you can see there's kind of a mark right there in the middle. This was two pieces, and then I put them together and then cut it loose. And if you look close, you can see these lines are going this way and these are going this way. And what I want to do, which is this is a little bit farther along, is smooth that all out. So I'm going to be adding some more water onto this now. It's stiffened up a little bit. And then develop a more interesting shape. But this can happen where it's just thin and wet, and then this, you can really see it here. It just got a wobble in it, and the wobbles don't come out. And when that happens, you're done. And again, at this point, I'm not going to waste any more time. That's another hard thing for students to understand, is that if you stop working on that piece and start over, not only is that the piece you're working on now never going to turn out, you've learned from that, and the next piece is going to be a little better. Again, it's so much fun, and you love what you're doing, but then you realize, all right, good example. There was a class where this student was making a teapot, and let's just say this is the teapot. And he had his handle, and he had the lid, and he had the spout right there. And I said, that's not going to work. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, when you put the water in, it's half full, it'll come out the side. And he was sanding, he was just working the thing to death. And I came back a half hour later, I said, here's what you do. Set that aside. You can turn that in as it is now and get some credit for that work that you did, and then start over. But if you keep doing that, you're only going to make that piece worse, and you're never going to make teeth. There's no way, and you can't reason, that if you love work, I mean, that clay isn't just something we're doing for anthropologists. Human beings like to make things out of clay. Clay, what makes clay, I was talking about how it's slippery and sticky and everything. Clay, you can form clay and it'll hold its shape. You can't do that with dirt. Make something out of dirt, when it dries, it falls apart. And then you can fire it and it changes chemically so that it won't break down. And then you can then it'll hold a glaze. The other thing, it lasts a long time. I mean, you look at all these pre-Columbian pottery in Central and South America, you think, boy, they made a lot of pots. Well, they did everything. They did weaving, they did all kinds of fiber. All that stuff is no longer around, but the clay is still here. And that's another good thing you want to kind of put in your students' minds, saying, remember, this thing's going to be around a long time after you are, so be sure to do a good job, because you're not going to be here to explain it, that you were feeling such and such. You know, I was expressing myself. No, you want to say, hey, there's a good pot. You want the anthropologist to see that. So anyway, the piece there that's stuck together, and this has, it's got some give, but what I'm going to do over the next few days, I'll do a little bit of work on this right now, and carefully work the shape, hopefully not getting a wobble in it, hopefully not splitting it, or just collapsing it. There's a lot that can go wrong.
So how long was that drawing?
These, well, that's the nice thing about plastic bags, like grocery bags and dry cleaning bags. They're just great things to have in the shop. So you can make something and wrap it up. If you wrap it up twice, it'll pretty much stay indefinitely. So these, I started these Friday afternoon, this is Monday, for the hop. I did a couple of steps on them. Again, the artist, part of the artist's job is to inform, but you also want to leave a little mystery there, so that if you make like that bowl, that took what, 5 minutes? And someone said, we made that bowl in 5 minutes, and now you want all that money for it? So what I wanted to do with these in particular was to show there's a lot of steps to it. And just making the shape on the wheel, an open shape like a bowl, is pretty easy to do. But, okay, I was talking earlier about mixing clay. When you sit around and you think of all this stuff, you have plenty of time to mull things over where you're sitting there throwing pots all day. And one day I counted how many times I handled the clay before I had a lump of clay to put on the wheel. It was 20 times. But when someone sees you put a lump of clay on the wheel and make a pot, they weren't unloading the truck, you know, and they weren't mixing the clay and doing all the wedging and all that stuff. So I was thinking, well, how can I, you know, show that there's the process is a lot more complicated than simply making a hollow piece, you know, on a wheel. Now I wish I had one step beyond this, because eventually when I'm done, if I'm like to make that narrow neck, I can either make a neck and just sort of transplant it on, or I can just put a coil of clay and make it. But this is, you know, from here up, that'll get gone later. That's not gonna be there. Another thing that I find is a good discipline of doing this process, which is something I don't think I'm ever going to learn, is patience. It's just carefully coax this along. I mean, a pull, you know, which is this, moving, making it come up like that. You know, a good pot, if it takes 100 times to get it right, well, you got to do it 100 times. You're not going to get it done in 5. You know. Now, on the other hand, a lot of little pots, bowls in particular, I think you do want to get some spontaneity and some quickness in it. And again, referring to art fairs, you can see pots that look like a, like a tornado, and that's, just pulling it up real quick, or getting the shape done, and then have your knuckle on the inside, and see how again, machines can't do that. Machines don't have knuckles.
How do you regulate the height? Like these two bows, very slight difference in the height. So how did you know?
If I wanted to make a set of those bowls, I've got it written down somewhere how much clay for each. Okay, where's those calipers? These are real handy too.
Oh, okay.
Like, let's say I was going to make 5 casseroles. I wanted to work on 5 casseroles. If I wanted to make a casserole, what I'd do is I'd make 5. And the bottom would all be the same weight of clay, the top would be the same weight of clay, and they would be, and it's all written down somewhere, and I would set the, the measurement for them. So I'd make 5 tops, 5 bottoms. I guarantee you, the first bottom and the first top aren't necessarily going to match. Maybe the first bottom and the 4th top would match, even though you're measuring very carefully. So then what you do is, once the pieces are done, you just take and switch the lids around and see which 5 is the best fitting arrangement of them. A little professional, a little shortcut there. But who knows? No one's going to know that. Say, boy, your lids fit. You say, well, that one does, but they ain't going to fit that one. Because then when you glaze fire them, the lid is, you fire it with the lid on, so that really gives the piece the continuity. But up until then, they're technically, interchangeable. And another, I don't have the gadget with me here, but I've seen different configurations of it. If I wanted to make a set of plates, I had this little thing I would clamp on the wheel, and there's a stick that comes up, and then on it there's a swivel that goes this way and this way. Mm-hmm. So I would make the first plate, and then I would take and set that point right to the edge of the plate. Finish that. And then I would just make everything to that point, and they would be, when you stack them up, they would look real nice. Good ideas are simple ideas. All good ideas are simple. That's the thing I find troublesome with education. I think too much these days, sounding like an old coot, they teach you to think of yourself as an artist. They don't teach you skills, Like at the beginning of a class, what I would do was, I thought it was a great line, because you sort of get their attention. I would say, I know you all know what you want to do. Well, guess what? You can't. And furthermore, you may not, because we're going to do my curriculum. But I promise you, if you will learn these skills that I'm going to show you through your assignments, your idea is going to mature, and then you'll be able to do it. But right now, you don't know how to do it. That idea, you need to have the technical skills and the experience to do that. I mean, you can make something out of clay, and if we do it right now, today, before we do anything, you're going to be changing your mind 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 or 15 times. Think towards that thing you want to do, and you're going to end up with something you enjoy making. There's no doubt about that. But if you want to learn your skills, you need to focus. And I said, if you copy me, try copying me. You can see that I know how to do it, and I'll tell you how to do it because I know how. I'll show you how. And no matter how hard you try, it's still going to be you. It may be similar, but unless you focus on those skills, your idea isn't going to, it's just going to go. So. It took me, now full disclosure, about 5 or 6 years before I really I could sit down and do the thing that I intended to do. I can make something that was okay, but I see old pots now and I think, That's good. Another thing that I think is important to do is this is a debate I had with my thesis committee, who again wanted me to be doing this avant-garde stuff and sculptural things, and this was in East Tennessee, where there's a really good folk tradition of art and crafts and of functional stuff. People made their own furniture, you know, people wove their curtains and upholstery and all this kind of stuff. And the way my committee would dismiss this is, well, that's just production, which is not so much, I mean, it was a pejorative term that was used as, there's nothing innovative. So after pondering this quite a bit, I reached the conclusion of, you know, what my opposing view, how I could express it. And I said, look, if I can work in a traditional style, you know, clay's, you can do anything on clay, but if I were to be making traditional, functional, wheel-thrown stoneware pots, doing traditional forms, bowls and teapots and casseroles and stuff, which lots of people do, I said, but if I can do that consistently and predictably and market those and enjoy doing it, that's an accomplishment. But if I just take my piece of clay and throw it against the wall and say, sunrise on the barnyard, you know, that's easy. You know, they were just never going to believe that it was a challenge to work in a narrow spectrum and put your own life into it, put your own skills into it, and sort of honor the tradition, but also have a little innovation. And the only improvement on that idea was a guy who used to teach art at Rocky, Richard Klein. And he said that one time, I thought it was so good, he says, you know, any good piece of work should have a little mystery in it for the other artists that understand what you're doing, but they don't see how you did that. You had some little thing that you figured out that they hadn't figured out yet. And I modified that. I wrote to Ben Jasper about it, and I said, it all should have a prank. There should be a little joke in there somewhere. Some little novelty to show you have a sense of humor, you know, that you're not going to think of this as some magnificent thing.
So what is your hand on the inside doing?
Let's see. Well, that's a bad spot. I'm trying, this is where you really get into eye-hand coordination, where you've got, you know, you're working on, I'm trying to get them squeezed, you know, right together with these fingers. I hope I come close. No, you could see sometimes if you get out of alignment, because I'm pushing out and squeezing in. So I'm really the compression. So if you're doing this, you'll get a little.
So
there'll be something that'll look funny.
Yeah, but how thin? How do you know when to stop?
Well, these are kind of show-offy. This is my. Again, there's see what I can do. It's my see what I can do. I can really make this thin, because there's a point where you know it's too fragile, but there's also a point where it's you want to get right. You want to stop right before that. You know, it's like the guy wants to know where the bus stop off. He says, you know, just get off one before I do. You think, oh, where's that? You know, it's pretty subjective. So anyway, but at this point, doing this like here for about 10 minutes, I'm adding water to the clay, and it's starting to soften a little bit, and it's going to lose its structure. In fact, a lot of times I I don't do that at all. I just do this with my fingers. So what I'm going to do is, see there, I had my finger here and I can see the bump there, so I have to put my hands in the right spot. But I'll let it sit out for a few minutes and then wrap it up.
Okay.
And then wrap it a little bit lightly so there's just a little bit of air, but it's ideally what I would do is I would be doing like 10 of these, and I would just do the step, and by the time I got to the 10th one I'd come back and do the other, because you can add, you know, you want the water on the surface of the clay. You almost want the outside of the wall to be a little bit slippery and the inside of the wall not so wet, not so slippery, and that would be that would give you that. And one other thing I'll do before I wrap this up is just sort of run these ribs on it to smooth that line and try and get it continuous. We've been working with a new clay, and I used to always run my clay through a 40 mesh screen, and some always said, well, I'm not gonna, that's too much work, I'm gonna stop doing that. And the clay had these lumps. I mean, it's called dry milled fire clay, which, you know, they're not homogenizing it, just digging it up and put it on a conveyor belt and sending it out, so that there was, some of the clay was real gummy and some was, you know, almost like, you know, concrete, you know, real coarse.
Mm-hmm.
So again, when I get to a point like this, you'd hit one of those lumps and it was like a bump. That's the end of that pot. It's like, might as well find a bottle cap or something in there. It's just, you can't go anywhere with it. So I started sifting the clay, and now I've got a bucket in the other room of all the stuff that comes out of it. It's mostly coarse material, but it's also, there's an impurity, which is, well, it's gravel, it's calcium carbonate, it's limestone. And when limestone, even a little tiny piece, when limestone is heated up, I think the word is anhydrous. It changes chemically so that when it cools down, it'll absorb moisture and it'll make it look almost like a little bullet hole, like a little, it'll pop out a crater. And then you look inside and there's a little white dot in there. Again, if I'm going to spend all this time, you know, a week working on a pot, I want to make sure that stuff is gone. Which brings me back to the idea of, if you make your own clay, it can be it seems like an awful lot of work, but it pays off. You know, you can make your own clay. Adding water, you know, my beef of everyone buying prepared clay that comes in boxes is, you paid that driver to deliver water. 30% of that clay is water. You know, workable clay is by weight. And you go, I can add water to clay. I think I can, if I can make good cookies, I can add clay, you know, mix clay properly. And the other thing is, any machine is going to twist the clay or do something to it. And again, you've got this stress, this internal stress in the clay. And if you just sift it into the water and then later scoop it out and put it on plaster, it's chaos. There's no alignment of anything in there. And then if you slap the clay around, you're just keeping everything random, but you're also making a better clay, and you're not paying for water. So it's not like, well, if I mix the clay myself, the clay won't be as good. It's actually better clay because you're starting with a saturated clay. Believe it or not, only once I've ever, this is sort of like a razor blade, only once did it just sort of flip and blood shoot out all over the place. A good place to find pottery tools is, you know, like a kitchen supply store. Alright, I'm gonna stop on that. Let me see if I have an example here. That's not a pottery tool, I don't know, it's not a spoon, it's a little paddle, but that works. This is a pastry tool with zigzag, and you can roll that in the clay. Let's see if that shows. Make a little pattern. I think that's an old army knife. It's stainless, so it doesn't get bothered by the clay. A good spatula. It's a good stiff rubber spatula. That's good for cleaning. I've used that for about 25 years. There's one thing I'm looking for in particular. I don't think this will show. It's a chopstick, okay? And then I just made a little X in the bottom so you can stamp.
Patterns.
Yeah, and then this is another chopstick that if you stamp that, it'll make a diamond pattern. I think this one pot, you can see. They put made into a diamond pattern. That is a hollow brush. The bristles wore out. And I said, well, if I stamp it, it'll make a little ring, and then I put a little iron on it. And that wheel is that, which is just a coil of clay that I stamped a wire on. And there's a little star. You know what's hard about doing this? Is to make a 5-pointed star so that it always looks right. Because it's hard to do. Because one leg will be longer, and then,
Right.
you know, if you can do it so it looks right at the top, but then turn the stamp a little bit. There's a spatula. Dental tools. Those are handy for cleaning. You don't want to take that in the kitchen anymore. Okay, here's a good example. Here is a. Now that's actually a pottery tool. 1 minute. All right. This is a loop tool for carving, but you can see the handle, which is a really good wood, that I pulled that ferrule off after this thing wore out, made a little stamp there, and then sharpened that to a point like a little scribe. I invented that. No, I didn't. I mean, I just made that out of junk. A nice old spoon. Sometimes that's just right. Anyway, there's a bunch of other stuff there. Oh, here, this is, I've used geometry. See if in school you use geometry to figure out how to get that exactly square. I had to plot it out on a piece of paper. You can't just, I mean, it looks like an X, but because what I use that for is to lay out my symmetrical grid.
Okay.
Because if I eyeball it, it's, I'm going over this way and that. And then this is just a white clay. I think I can just do this on my hand. No, let's see. No, it's too wet. But this is what I use to draw in the clay. I can make those dots, or I can make these banding lines. I like to do this, banding, there's another pottery word. The only way I can describe it is it makes the pots look rounder. If you add these lines, and then of course putting a square grid on a curved surface is also appealing to the eye. You know, that if you get it just right, otherwise, you know, it's like in the Guggenheim. Why do they have, I just never understood that.